Hi there, I'm Evan. I'm the Artistic Director of Forest Collective, and I'm also the composer and conductor for our upcoming production of Orpheus, which is a new ballet opera that I have just finished a few weeks ago. And I'm here sitting at a very dusty piano in an attempt to talk about the music. I am the worst pianist in known history, so I'm certainly not going to play through much of the music, but I'm going to just talk a little bit about the musical ideas behind the work and give you a little insight and a little taste around the sort of language and ideas that I'm using in the piece. So the work, as I mentioned, is Orpheus. It centres on the Greek myth, or a version of, and I have always wanted to write, not always, but I, for the past couple of years, have envisaged a large-scale work about Orpheus. He was meant to have been the greatest musician of the ancient world in the ancient times. Many people know the myth via some of the famous operas, the myth being that when Orpheus's beloved Eurydice died, and there's varying versions about how she died, Orpheus was so upset that he undertook the perilous journey to the underworld, at which point he had to convince Hades that he could have her back, and he said, well, you can, on one provision, that when you return to Earth, the journey back through the underworld, you can't turn around and look at her. And of course he does, and then her soul gets sucked back down to Earth. And it's a really amazing story, and it's one of those sort of great analogies in Greek mythology about humanity and humans sort of going up against the natural world and trying to kind of overcome aspects of the world, aspects of nature that humans, death is inevitable, I guess, is sort of one of the great themes of it. But in my version, we do the cave stuff, but and that is a prominent feature of the work, but there's also other sections that deal with his relationship with Callas, who is a young adolescent boy that in ancient Greece, it was quite common for a man to have that sort of relationship, and he has this relationship where he's a mentor. It's a sexual relationship, and in some sources of the myth, it's actually he loves Callas more than he loves Eurydice. So this really interested me. The fact that he was a musician obviously creates really interesting musical textures that you can explore. So the work features the harp quite predominantly as a sort of modern version of the lyre, which Orpheus would have played. And it's also really fascinating because of other operas, I think. So the way that Eurydice particularly is depicted in a lot of the older operas. So the Monteverdi L'Orfeo, which is one of the, if not the oldest opera, it's often credited as being the oldest opera, the original, but there were other works that could have been titled an opera, but it's really sort of certainly the most well-known of the oldest of operatic works. That explores the Orpheus myth, and the other work that I use the text from, so I'm using sections of the libretto of L'Orfeo and sections of the libretto of Orpheus and Eurydice by Gluck from the 18th century, depict women very much in that time. So especially in the Gluck, Eurydice is I'm not going to go into the plot of that opera, but she is very, to me, it's a really kind of odd way to paint her. So I'm really interested in giving her, using the words that were created for these characters in the 18th century and the 17th century, and that are really quite sort of stifling from a contemporary perspective on feminism, giving this female character an opportunity to voice her humanity, especially when she's being abused. And I want to acknowledge that I'm a white middle-class man writing music for a woman, female character going through pain, and that is just it's a long cycle in opera of men making female characters go through all of these dreadful things. And so I want to try and at least acknowledge that, if not rectify it maybe, or certainly open the conversation around male composers putting female characters through such torturous episodes. Opera is infamous for the woman always dies at the end, and this is the same situation in this opera. It's a 19th century trope almost. And so I want to at least try and empower Eurydice to be a force for her own destiny. And so one of the lines that's really quite crucial, which I took from the Monteverdi and is actually for me quite contemporary, is that she says, what life am I to lead now? Like when her body comes back to life, when her soul is sort of returned back to Orpheus. And what fatal, terrible secret does Orfeo hide from me? I sway, I tremble, I die. And it's this sort of sense of you're going against the laws of nature. You shouldn't be doing this. I wanted to just empower Eurydice with some of her own power, not to be constantly at the beck and call of men. Callas is sort of a different relationship that is interesting to explore, because he's a young man, he's influenced, it's again another power thing, he's being influenced and led by Orpheus. These relationships, the young boy had to be passive sexually, and the older man, it was expected, would be the insertive sexually. So it was a social taboo for an older man, once he started growing a beard, to receive, to be the receptive in a sexual context. So again, there's a power at play there. Callas's love, which, as I said in some of the sources, is genuine. In the myth, there's this love that Callas and Orpheus have on the Argo, the ship with Jason and the Argonauts. And then it's basically Orpheus loved this young man, and then one day he met Eurydice and they got married. There's no through line. What happened to Callas is one question that I like to raise about talking about this work, and I don't answer that question in the work.